Welcome everybody. This is Bitcoin Milwaukee, March 13th, 2014. Tonight we're joined by Michael Flaxman of CoinSafe.com, a custodial cold storage service. And I'm sure there's a lot more to it than just that. So he's going to talk about his company and their recent announcement at Texas Bitcoin Conference in Austin here just a few days ago. And then we're going to take some questions. And I promise you all out there in YouTube land, we're going to get the Q&A thing set up so that you guys can submit your questions. But hopefully our group here will ask some of the questions you might have on your mind, and we'll get those concerns covered as well. So without further ado, thanks for joining us tonight, Michael, and take it away. Tell us about CoinSafe.
Great. Well, hi guys. This is so cool that we get to do a little meetup from across the country. We're regulars at the Seattle Bitcoin meetup, and so it's nice to be able to see other Bitcoin meetups. So thank you for having us. So I thought I would talk mostly about cold storage generally, how you should be doing it, some gotchas, common mistakes, ways you could be doing it better, and then we can talk a little bit about what CoinSafe is doing. And I think we do the best cold storage, but that's really up to you to decide. Mostly I want this to be useful and educational for you so that you understand better how the protocol works and what risks you might or might not be taking that you don't know about. So how many of you guys are using cold storage? Okay, that is good to see. That's like step one. That's the most important thing. If you take nothing away from today at all, it's that you should keep the vast majority of your funds in cold storage. And cold storage, for those of you who don't know, means that your Bitcoin are kept totally offline. If you're really doing it right, they're not just kept offline, they're generated offline. A lot of people don't fully understand what that means. What does it mean that a Bitcoin would be like generated? But what's behind a Bitcoin is just a long private key. Think of it as a really, really long password that would be possible to memorize, but very, very hard. And that's the only thing that protects somebody else from spending your Bitcoin. There is no concept of ownership in Bitcoin. There's just possession of the private key. The protocol doesn't know your name. It doesn't know who you are. Doesn't know whether the coins were stolen or not or whether you deserve them. Just knows whether you possessed that private key at the time you signed a transaction. So you generate basically random numbers. And it's important that you do your random number generation correctly. So you need to use a proper cryptographically secure pseudo-random number generator. Sometimes you'll see people do their own implementation and they don't use a cryptographically secure pseudo-random number generator. They just use, well, I guess what I would say is a non-cryptographically secure one. Or in the scariest of instances, there was that Android issue a while back where people were using a function called secure random, which was supposed to give you secure random numbers, and was not. I think Greg Maxwell's comment on the post was something like, secure random is not. And people lost Bitcoin, so that's actually not as funny. So getting back to the issue at hand is creating your Bitcoin private keys on a totally offline machine, one that isn't connected to the internet and won't connect to the internet. Then you want to save those somewhere. Now this creates the first issue. Some people will use paper wallets. If you're using paper wallets, oops, I lost the video there. Can you guys still see me?
Yeah, we've got you.
Okay, great. So I was going to ask how many of you guys are using paper wallets, but I can't actually see you anymore. So yell out if you're using a paper wallet. Okay, so we got a decent number of paper wallets. And of those paper wallets, oh, I can see you guys again. Raise hands if it's an encrypted paper wallet or just a regular paper wallet. Raise hands for encrypted.
Encrypted.
Okay, good. So you're using encryption, hopefully BIP38. So here's the basic crux of the issue. If somebody finds that private key, they can take your Bitcoins instantly and irreversibly. And if they're smart, they can do it in a way so that you can't find out who they are. So that's a big problem because you want to have multiple copies of this file laying around. Whether it's a paper wallet, whether it's on a USB drive, whether it's on an external hard drive, whether you etched it into stone. The idea is you don't want just one copy. And the reason's really simple. If your house burns down and your Bitcoin is under your mattress, well, that really, really sucks. Now, of course, you can mitigate that. You can get a safe, and then you hope that the safe is fireproof. You want to put in a bag that's mold resistant. You want to be sure that the safe is anchored to the building. Sometimes people break into a house and they just carry the whole safe with them, and then they can spend a week breaking it open on their own time. So you want to have multiple copies. The issue is, if you have multiple copies, that means there are multiple places where if somebody finds your private keys, they can take your Bitcoin. And so this gets back to the same crux of the problem, that is, you want multiple copies, but you want to keep it safe. And so the solution for this is to use encryption. A lot of people use TrueCrypt. That's a very popular one. If you're some developers like OpenSSL or GPG, it's not so much about choosing like the best algorithm or anything like that. If you're using the standard stuff that everyone else is using, you'll be fine. The real issue is choosing your password. It goes without saying that if your decryption key is 12345, well, you're not really protecting any of your Bitcoin. It's just causing inconvenience for you and not really deterring an attacker. So you have this password. It should be long. It should have lots of entropy. It should be randomly generated. People don't do that. They pick, the mix of their birthday and their dog's name or something like that. So then people get clever and they say, well, I'll do my birthday and my dog's name, but I'll also put my favorite color in the middle or something. Or I'll change the 3's to E's and I'll add an exclamation point at the end. And if any of that's resonating as something you do, you should remind yourself that people who crack passwords know this too. So it is very hard to have a password that is truly random enough. And there are all kinds of systems you can use to make sure that your password really is random. From the most simple, you can use software that looks at a huge dictionary of words and randomly picks from them, and you tell it how long of a, I'm not going to say phrase, it's really just a bag of words, how long you want this to be based on how much entropy you need. In other words, how hard would it be to guess? And what's really powerful about entropy is that each character exponentially increases the amount of entropy. So you can go from something like a 6-character password, which is wildly insecure, doesn't take a skilled attacker to break any 6-character password, to a 12-character password, which, depending on the scenario, may be very secure. And the only difference there was 6 characters. Now, I'm oversimplifying, and it depends on your situation. I'm not saying a 12-character password is necessarily good enough, but for many things, it is. The point being that the difference between a 6 and a 12-character password is not a doubling of the amount of entropy. It's exponential increase. So I'd have to do out the math for which characters we're allowing in the character space to tell you the exact number of difference in bits. But I can show you some cool stuff on our site where we map this out. And it's basically like a wall if you just look at how much entropy you get versus character length. So when you're choosing your passwords, the secret is always choose a longer password. But it's hard. The longer the password it is, the harder it is to memorize. And so this takes us to the last major issue with your cold storage. And that is the what happens if you get hit by a bust scenario. So you might have this cold storage that is Bitcoin's generated offline. It's encrypted using a strong password that you memorize. It's kept in multiple locations. So maybe you're safe at home and maybe you have a safety deposit box at the bank. And you're thinking, I'm doing everything right. There's no way anyone's going to get my Bitcoin. But the issue is you've covered theft really well. You haven't covered loss. And in security, theft and loss are two sides of the same coin. Because what happens if you get hit by a bust? How is your family or your children or your heirs going to get your Bitcoin? And if you secured it really well, they won't be able to. They'll be locked out. So there's a solution for this, and it's called Shamir's Secret Sharing Scheme. It's based on a paper written by Adi Shamir in the 70s. He's a famous mathematician. He's the S in RSA. And basically, you can divide a secret into as many parts as you want and set a threshold to recover that secret. So you can say, I'm going to divide this secret, my decryption key, into whatever threshold you want. Let's say 7 pieces. And any 4 of which can combine to get the whole key. But 3 gets you nothing. So we're going to give this to 7 trusted people. Each one gets 1. And the simple majority, 4 of them, can get together and they get the decryption key. They still don't have the physical drive that I want to decrypt, or in the case of a BIP38 paper wallet, the physical piece of paper that I want to decrypt. But they do have the information necessary to decrypt it if they did. So now I can leave this in my safe, one at home, maybe one with my lawyer, and then I hand out these Shamir shares to trusted third parties, And I don't have to worry about what happens if I get hit by a bus. Is my family going to know my secret password to decrypt my Bitcoin? And so that's really the standard that you should have. And there are all kinds of tools that you can use to do this. Everything from Armory has it somewhat built in, though it's complicated. PassGuardian.com has a cool implementation. If you're more technical, you can use like the SSSS library that comes on most Debian installations for the last, like 7 or 8 years. So there's a whole range of how you can do this, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But the really key things are use cold storage, generate your keys offline, make lots of copies of them so that you're not trapped if you're not in trouble if your house burns down or wherever you kept them, if the USB drive fails or the paper molds or whatever happens to that one copy. Encrypt those copies so that if somebody finds them, you're not out of luck. And then finally divide that decryption key. So if you forget or lose it, you can have it recovered. And people often discount their own memory, or they overestimate their own memory. They think, well, I won't forget it because it's so important. But it's not like your phone number that you give out every week that you're used to using, or a password for your email that you're used to typing in all the time. This is a password that you don't really use very much. And so it might be years until you go to withdraw that Bitcoin and then realize that you can't spend it. And that's really the worst part, is that we do cold storage. That's our business. So we're obviously biased in who we see, but it's not uncommon for somebody to come to us and say, I just lost hundreds of Bitcoin because I forgot the password for my cold storage, or I generated the addresses incorrectly, or I got doxxed. There's that too. But this stuff is hard. You have to do everything right. You cannot make mistakes. The good news is there's tons of tools and information out there. So if you're curious about this stuff and you're technically proficient, you're going to find that there's so much stuff you can do on your own for free. No one knows. It's your secret. You can be your own bank. And that is really cool. But there's a word of warning that this stuff is complicated, and we're talking about money, so mess-ups can be quite bad. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how CoinSafe does all this stuff, and some other resources about how other people do this. But I know that was a lot of information. So first, I just wanted to ask what questions you guys have, if that makes sense. What are your interests in terms of cold storage, and what problems are you running into?
So I think that was a really good explanation in probably the shortest time possible of how simply cold storage works, and if you've been looking at this thing for a little bit of time, a lot of folks have run into that first barrier and said, okay, I can see what the problems are right ahead of me, and I can see what future problems are with achieving this. And we've tackled a lot of that. I guess I was thinking that we have a couple of fresh faces who are SVP'd who haven't arrived yet, and usually folks trickle in throughout the couple hours that we're here. But everyone who's here tonight at the moment, I think that was really good for YouTube land, and potentially for the folks who might watch this later on and are learning. But we've kind of, the folks who are here, tackled those things. I know that I'm interested in hearing what separates CoinSafe as a custodial cold storage solution from taking that upon yourself. How does CoinSafe provide any resources to help people do it for themselves, as opposed to relying on cold storage clouds or services, third parties, whether it be CoinSafe or someone else. And then what are some of the premium features that really save the average person who could do cold storage on their own, save them a lot of time, and also provide sufficient trust that this is a good idea for the typical Bitcoiner nowadays is pretty self-reliant, and I think we're seeing it already, but we're certainly going to see a great deal more of people who aren't as self-reliant, and maybe they need help getting there, but maybe they are the kind of target market for some of the lower tier services of CoinSafe. I guess, Michael, if you could go through that, and then I think there will be some questions.
Yeah, that sounds great. So a bunch of questions. We'll just go through one at a time. And please jump in anytime if you guys have questions or something doesn't make sense. One thing that's really different about us versus other services is, first of all, we're very transparent. So all of our code and practices are open source and freely available on our site. So you can literally copy everything that we do and not pay us a Satoshi, and we are totally fine with that. We put this stuff out there because we think it's the best way to do it. We don't write any cryptography, really. We're just applying cryptography in the standard way. But we're telling you these are the things that you need to look out for. Here are the ways to manage these risks. And I think like the hacker DIY types really like it because it's things like you might be doing all this stuff right, but are you putting your USB drives on a high shelf in the bank vault in case there's a flood? Are you putting them in Ziploc bags in case the sprinkler system goes off? Are you putting that inside a Faraday bag in case there's an electromagnetic pulse? Now that last one's kind of crazy, but we do it anyway. And Faraday bags aren't actually that expensive. They're quite cheap. So we have all this info that's out there, and you can see that we're doing it in, I think, the best way. Whereas a lot of services are kind of like Docs or Coinbase, and they just say, yeah, trust us. Like, we know what we're doing. You can log in, and we'll tell you that we're holding your Bitcoin. But they're off the blockchain, and that's the really important thing. Now, services like blockchain.info are on the blockchain, and you can always easily verify that your Bitcoin is there. You should only store Bitcoin for the long term on the blockchain. There are benefits to going off the blockchain sometimes for some uses, but the blockchain is this amazing protocol. It's so powerful. You don't have to worry about solvency. You don't have to worry about, it removes a lot of the trust component because you're able to verify. So you absolutely shouldn't keep Bitcoin off the blockchain for storage. Now it can be useful if you want to use a service that's doing cold storage on the back end, pooling your Bitcoin, taking some risk, but is available for spending instantly. And that can be nice. But if you want that kind of service, blockchain.info is pretty good. So that's probably where I would go anyway, just for if I was looking for that. So we open source everything that we do. We're also not anonymous in any way. We go to all these events. We're real people. It's not like some of the early Bitcoin scams that no one knows who run them. They're not registered companies in the U.S. We're a real life company, register, raise some money, although we haven't announced that yet. And we're looking to offer this service that I think Bitcoin really needs. So one of the big problems right now is that it's really hard for the next generation of Bitcoiners. Basically, anybody who's going to a Bitcoin meetup right now is by definition somewhat on the leading edge. And for us, we might get this stuff a little bit better because we think it's really cool, we're into it, we've spent the time and effort. But a merchant who's taking Bitcoin, they don't really have any idea what it is. They heard that it's lower transaction fees and they get more customers, so they decide to try offering it. But if you ask them, how are you doing your cold storage? They're going to be like, what? They just don't really get that. And so we exist to fill the need for all the new Bitcoiners that are coming in. And then for the existing ones who maybe know how to do all this stuff, we're still just really easy. It's super simple. You don't have to know how to do this stuff. There are no gotchas. We don't let you set up anything that could hurt yourself. And that's in part because we generate the private keys offline on air-gapped machines using special hardware and software. So that part is something you never have to do. And when it comes to verifying you, we do all this really cool stuff. So I should start out by saying we're a US company. That means we have to follow US laws, and that means that there's KYC guidelines as well. So we require all of your identifying information, which some people don't like and other people love because it means that they're it's a real relationship with a company as opposed to like an anonymous website thing. And so where that works out really well is if anything were to ever happen to you in that unfortunate event, you don't need to worry about your heirs knowing some secret password or a secret thing about how to get access to your Bitcoin. All they have to do is show us that they are your next of kin and that you really are deceased. And there's a lot of paperwork and it's a little slow, but we can pass your Bitcoin along for free, very simply. But the other real main use case is that it's just so simple. So every withdrawal requires multi-factor authentication, which is what you're used to. You get a text message and an email, and you type in the code. But we also require multi-user authentication, which nobody on the internet does. And I think we'll see companies start copying this in the future. And so what this means is that when you go to withdraw, you get your text, you get your email, you type in your username and password. This is a very high barrier for somebody else to have all of this info about you, even if your computer were completely compromised. And they did. We also require an email or phone call to your guardian. So you set somebody up when you create the account. It's usually a spouse or business partner, but it can be a friend or relative, lawyer, accountant, whoever you trust, and they have to sign off on your withdrawal as well. They can't take your money, they can't redirect it to them or anything, but when you say, send me, my 10 Bitcoin from this address to that address, they have to say, yep, this is really you. And that's one of the biggest issues right now with hot wallets, is that if somebody else can impersonate you by somehow stealing your login credentials, that's really, really bad. So in our setup, they'd have to get your login credentials, your phone, your email, and your guardian as well. And that is just a ridiculously high bar. And then we have all kinds of fraud detection stuff in the back. So if we see that you're logging in from a Nigerian IP and asking to withdraw all of your Bitcoin and you've never logged in from a Nigerian IP before, we're going to look very cautiously at that. And so we can do all other types of authentication, from knowledge-based authentication tests to make sure that you really are you because you know the things that you would know, to, at the most extreme, going to a licensed U.S. notary and proving your identity in person, and they verify your identity documents. Now, that's very rare. That's not something that most people will ever experience, but it is a protection in case somebody is trying to impersonate you. We are very concerned and monitor that closely. So basically, you just sign up, get an address, deposit your Bitcoin, you never have to think about it again. And that's what's so easy. But whenever you want it, it's always just those couple clicks away, and then we physically go into the bank vault and sign a transaction on an air-gapped machine, which is one that never touches the internet. And we sign the transaction from inside the bank vault. Then we take a USB out to broadcast it to the world, and so no private keys ever leave the bank vault. So that's kind of what we do, how we operate. I'd be happy to send you guys beta invites and give you a first free month of storage. We've been kind of backed up processing invites. Will, I'm sorry, I just noticed that yours is in the queue and we haven't got to it yet, but we will approve yours.
Waiting.
Yeah, this is what we do. We store Bitcoin.
I think it's certainly a service that's necessary. There's definitely a market for it, and one of my biggest interests right now is how to bring this technology to people who would want to use it, but don't yet have the computer faculties or strengths, skills, whatever. The kind of computer user who spends many hours online, but still uses the same 2 or 3 passwords on every single website login that they have.
Yeah, that's a common one.
Yeah, these are the folks that I would love to bring Bitcoin to, and they're interested. And there's a somewhat of a large curve and a learning curve for security, digital security, and that's one of my main focuses. Kind of where I'd like, where I've seen, at least in the last couple of weeks, where our group has gone and helping new users and stuff, and on a larger scale too. There's some things I'm working on with that, but one of the questions I would have right off the bat, and then I can see there's a couple more in the audience, and so I'll just get the ball rolling as folks can come up to the microphone here and ask theirs, and we'll just do some as quick as we can. We got about 5-10 minutes. My question is, you mentioned air-gapped machines. Now, those of us who've been paying very close attention to security attack vectors or these kinds of things are aware that there's this, if anyone out there really wants to get paranoid, go ahead and Google bad BIOS. And it has to do with an attack vector that can jump an air gap in some really incredibly insidious, creative ways. So talk to us a bit about what you guys do to safeguard against that, because I can tell you're aware. And then we'll have some other questions, maybe 2-3 more questions.
Yeah, so stepping back a bit, an air-gapped machine means there's physically an air gap between it and the internet. This was kind of a pre-wireless term, because now there's wireless internet. So on an air-gapped machine, you can remove the Ethernet port, the wireless card. In our extreme example, you can even remove the hard drive. And the reason is because we boot from RAM using a live operating system. Booting from RAM means that everything is stored in RAM as the computer operates, and when you pull the plug, everything is gone. There is no hard drive to find info on. And so this is, we kind of call it like tinfoil hat stuff sometimes because it's a little bit paranoid. But you wouldn't want to have this machine that was laying around that maybe somewhere had a cached copy of your private keys. And so if somebody found that machine and ran a script, they would get your Bitcoin. So we run Tails, which is, let's see, it's called the Amnesiac Incognito Live System. It's often used by like human rights dissidents in like China and stuff who are very paranoid about them being monitored. We don't use it for everything. I mean, this is my MacBook that I love, but for anything touching Bitcoin private keys. So we boot that from a DVD, so we know it's uneditable in any way. And then the only way that information gets onto that machine is via a USB drive. And that USB drive doesn't have any executables, it just has data. So we send that data to the machine. We can do some tricks to verify that it hasn't been tampered in the middle, and then we run really, really basic software on the machine. So it's not like we're connecting to some website and uploading or downloading keys. We're just generating keys, encrypting them, decrypting them, signing transactions, and passing data back and forth, all at somewhat low-level operations. But there are so many different types of freakish attacks. There's even allegedly one where you can listen to the machine decrypting data, and based on the acoustic patterns of the way it passes sound to the processor and the cache, you can interpret the decryption key, which is a very spooky thought. Now, this is not known to be occurring, but it is theoretically possible. There could be a weakness in your random number generator. So you might think you're using a random number to generate your Bitcoin totally offline, but actually that random number generator has a relatively small number of numbers it might generate, maybe only in the millions. So you wouldn't notice that it was a bad random number generator, but somebody else might. You can solve that problem by feeding your own entropy as well. So not only do we generate keys using the random number generator built into the machine, but then we also like literally bang on the keyboard for a long time, which is kind of silly, but that we combine that with the randomness from the machine and know that between the two, no one can duplicate that as long as you bang on the keyboard for a long enough time. And you might see this if you're using like bitaddress.org, for example, makes you move the mouse or bang the keyboard. It's really annoying at the time, but your safety is only as good as your random number generator, so it's kind of important. I'm not sure I got all your questions, Will. What did I leave out?
Well, yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
We'll do 3 questions. So try to be quick. The first question is, what do you do? Do you actually hold on to the private keys, and can you decrypt and access them yourself? And then, so it would be a zero-trust scenario. Trust you that you're going to use those private keys without our permission. But do you protect against that?
Yes.
The second question is, in the scenario that the government where you're domiciled decides to confiscate all your private keys, do you have a use case to deal with that? That's a possible scenario. The third is, have any of your customers died on you? What do you do?
I'm sorry, what was the third question?
The third one?
Yeah, got the first 2.
Have any of your customers died on you? And then what do you do?
Yeah. Okay, we'll go in order. So number 1 was the private keys and trust, and that's absolutely true. That is a leap of faith that people using our service have to trust us. That's true of any Bitcoin wallet service. There are differences, of course, in the way that we do it, that it's all open source, that it's on the blockchain. And I think those are things that you should look for in any service that you use, and some do that, but most don't. But we also set it up in a way that no individual has access to the private keys. So we have a transaction signing committee. We don't say who the members are for obvious reasons, but we are very public in terms of who we are and who's ultimately responsible. And it takes 2 of them to go into the bank vault together to decrypt the USB drives. And that's important so that no one individual has even the ability, if they wanted to take Bitcoins. But there is an element of trust. If you think you know what you're doing and want to do this yourself, you're certainly welcome to. We open source all our info. We love your feedback. and we're happy to support you in doing that. Most people don't want to be managing private keys. It is really, really hard to do correctly. For example, on the Shamir secret sharing side, we divide our decryption key into 11 parts, and the simple majority 6 can combine to get it. Now, those people don't have access to the safety deposit boxes, so it's not so much an attack vector as a recovery mechanism. So were we, to have a nuclear explosion in Seattle, Washington, our home city, and the team's wiped out, and our bank vault is wiped out as well. Well, we have bank vaults in 3 states, non-neighboring, and we have these 11 Shamir shares in different states as well. So 6 of them, would survive any city being wiped out and could recombine. Obviously, that would be a really traumatic event. It would probably be the end of the company. We'd probably just have to return the funds if something that serious happened. But even in a case like that, we're covered, and you always should be as well. So that's kind of the threshold for doing it. But yes, it's absolutely right. There's a trust component, and it's really looking at who you're dealing with. The second question was, the government. Yes. So I should say up front, if privacy and protection from the government is your #1 concern, we are not the place for you. We are really good at security and convenience, and that's the trade-off that we make. But the good news is, if privacy is your #1 concern, you can still do everything that we do. We just can't do it for you. As a U.S. company, if we get a valid legal order, we will have to follow it. Unfortunately, in this country, that could even include orders that we can't tell you about, which would be real. That's an unfortunate reality of being a U.S. company.
That clear, Michael. That's really great. I appreciate that a lot that you made that clear. But certainly, there's definitely still a lot of demand for a service like yours. But I really think that's great that you shared that.
Yeah, it is just the reality, and there is a service in Hong Kong that does something similar to what we do. And if that's your #1 concern, they might be the better fit for you. But ultimately, we are not anonymous in any major way, in that we require knowing all the details about who you are, so that we have a signed customer agreement, which is just checking a box, and having a real relationship in that sense. But that means that if the government asks us to say, they think that this address was used in a crime, and they present us with a valid legal order, we would have to comply. So that's something to be mindful of. I think most people value having a U.S. company more than that, and so I think there's a real demand for having a U.S. company storing Bitcoin, but I totally understand the concern, and I'm not trying to trick anybody in that regard. And we wish the rules were a little bit different, but it's just the reality. And then lastly, about our users dying. Fortunately, we have not had a user die yet. We do have a process in place for that, and it's really easy if there's a death certificate and a valid legal court order saying, this person has died and their assets now go to this person. We can do it in other ways as well, but they're a little bit slower because we need to be sure that we're not releasing your Bitcoin to somebody else who's impersonating your death. But we recognize if that happens, it's a really unfortunate situation for everyone involved, and we don't want to get in the way of that. It's your Bitcoin. We're just protecting it for you. So as soon as we can be sure that it's really you or really your heirs, we pass the Bitcoin on to them very easily. That's one thing about not having your own private keys that's really nice. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that's good that you haven't had any users die yet. But I think we're interested in, I know some folks here see and things like that with Bitcoin, and there are some interesting solutions out there that you have to be pretty crafty to put to their full effect, fullest potential. I guess my one little follow-up to that would be, what sort of on-blockchain or blockchain utilizing solutions do you see for that kind of thing that maybe your company might implement, or just any company might implement? I guess this is kind of the smart contract, smart will question.
Yeah, so you see this often. The example that people like to give is like the parent and the child and the lawyer will do some sort of agreement to transfer the Bitcoin. And so, maybe on their deathbed they transfer it with their kid, or maybe they die and the child and the lawyer transfer the Bitcoin. And it certainly sounds cool, but the reality is it's this is tricky stuff. It's not something you want to be like, I think we're transferring our assets correctly. You want to be really sure. You want to have tested it, and it's the vast majority of people who are interested in that are probably not experts in the protocol. So it is really cool that that's possible, and I think a great example is like arbitration. Bit rated, for example, is a great way to use a multi-sig transaction to effectively resolve a contract dispute. But I think 2 of 3 is just way too low a threshold for something like your estate. You could be in a car accident with your loved ones, and now the Bitcoin is lost for the survivors. That's just a horrible outcome. So I think 2 of 3 can be really useful for short period events, but for something that's very long-term, like storage, 2 of 3 just does not cut it. I don't even think it's close.
That's really interesting. Well, I wanted to give you one chance to tell folks where they can sign up for private beta and when we can expect the public release of CoinSafe and the services there. I think, this is broadcast live on YouTube, so if that's something you'd like to offer just our members, I can facilitate that. But just wanted to let you know that, Michael. But yeah, if you want to invite private beta users and fill up your queue even more.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to plug before we say thank you and good night? Yeah,
so we are coinsafe.com, and on every page there's a sign up thing in the footer. So go ahead and do that. You can even, we'll send you an email saying you're in the queue. If you respond and say, hey, I saw this on the YouTube thing, we'll bump you right up to the top. We're probably a couple more weeks at least away from a more public launch. We're iterating, getting all this feedback, tweaking the way we do notifications and onboardings, and just making sure that it's really, really easy to use. The goal here is this is cold storage that your non-technical friends would be like, oh, yeah, I use that. It works. It's simple. Yeah, coinsafe.com. Respond that you saw it here, and we'll bump you to the top of the queue. Also, we are very happy to give you a free little mini audit of your existing cold storage. We do it all the time. So if you're unsure, I think my shirt even says, is your Bitcoin secure? If you're unsure, it's usually a pretty bad sign. But sometimes we can tell you, like, hey, if you just did this little tweak, you'd be a lot more secure without a lot more work. So if that's a concern of anyone, feel free to email me anytime, michael@coinsafe.com, michael@coinsafe.com. And I'm always happy to give you a little mini audit. It's no obligation. All of our stuff's open source anyway.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Michael. And everyone go check out coinsafe.com. I think they're doing it in a different way, it being custodial Bitcoin cold storage, which is kind of under the spotlight with some of the third parties that have failed our trust in recent news. So I like what CoinSafe has going on, and I'm interested to follow your story, and we wish you success. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
We'll talk to you soon.
Alrighty. Take care.